Welcome to this explainer. Okay, today we are stepping onto a terrifyingly complex geopolitical chessboard. We're going to be analyzing the fragile architecture of our modern world by comparing it to the tense, precarious events of 1913, right before the outbreak of World War I. Now, the information we're unpacking today is dense, it's historical, and honestly, it might just dictate the future of our civilization. So gather your focus because we're looking at the exact mechanics of how global orders actually collapse.
So, are we already on the precipice of World War III? This is the provocative question we absolutely have to answer right out of the gate. It's a high-stakes question that demands our attention. And look, we aren't here to fearmonger, right? We're just here to understand the data. The sheer volume of potential black swan events capable of sparking a collapse of our global geopolitical order is, quite frankly, staggering. To answer this, we've got to look closely at the tripwires that exist today and compare them to the ones that brought the whole world crashing down a century ago.
Okay, let's dive into this. Here's our roadmap. First, the modern powder keg. Second, echoes of 1913. Third, a vastly more complex world. Fourth, the slow boil of war. And finally, preventing the next Sarajevo. We're going to jump right across eras to compare the fragile alliances of the past with today's super volatile climate.
Section 1. The modern powder keg, today's global crisis.
To start things off, we really have to map out the current state of the board. Right now, we're observing a series of highly volatile, interconnected events all happening simultaneously. And the key thing to remember here is that none of these events exist in a vacuum. They are constantly pushing and pulling on a massive web of global interests. I mean, we've got US and Israeli strikes in Tehran, followed by Iranian missile retaliation aimed at regional bases in places like Kuwait, Oman, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and Turkey. Then, we have Russia engaged in a really grueling conflict in Ukraine, Gaza remains an open wound, plus there was an audacious US military raid capturing the president of Venezuela. From a purely analytical standpoint, this is a massive amount of kinetic energy entering the international system all at exactly the same time.
To really wrap our heads around this danger, think back to the infamous 2010 Afghanistan counterinsurgency, or COIN, spaghetti chart. When this diagram went public, people literally shook their heads at how impossibly intractable it looked. It showed how a military action in one totally isolated village could unpredictably disrupt the economy or tribal politics in a completely unrelated sector. And get this, that was just the mapping for one single country. So imagine a chart like that today, but depicting the entire world's alliances, trade agreements, cultural bonds, and religious ties. It's like a giant puzzle, a massive tangled web where one isolated move can trigger an unimaginable domino effect across the entire globe.
Section 2. Echoes of 1913, the Alliance Trap.
Now, to fully understand our modern spaghetti chart, we really need to look at historical precedent. Back in 1913, European leaders had created a highly rigid system of alliances. France and Russia signed a mutual defense pact. Germany and Austro-Hungary established a similar arrangement. Meanwhile, Russia shared this deep cultural bond with their fellow Slavs in Serbia. The crazy part? These leaders didn't realize they were basically building a machine made entirely of tripwires, one that would eventually force their hands regardless of what they actually wanted. In a really tragic irony, as the crisis later unfolded, the leaders of Russia and Germany, Tsar Nicholas II and Kaiser Wilhelm II, who were actually cousins, by the way, were desperately telegraphing each other, trying to stop the gears of war. But they couldn't do it. They were bound by the rigid, intractable treaties they had signed, but barely understood.
Let's trace how fast this actually moved. In June 1914, Franz Ferdinand is murdered in Sarajevo. At the time, that was just a relatively minor jostle in a forgotten corner of Europe. But then, the trap activates. By July, Austria-Hungary attacks Serbia. Because of those deep cultural bonds, Russia mobilizes. That immediately triggers Germany to mobilize and declare war on Russia, France, and Belgium. And because German troops entered Belgium, Great Britain then declares war on Germany. Literally in mere weeks, the entire geostrategic network collapsed right on top of itself. The dominoes fell exactly as the treaties dictated, completely plunging the world into a devastating industrial war that none of those leaders truly saw coming.
Section 3. A vastly more complex world, then versus now.
So if 1913 was a powder keg, the architecture of global politics today is, well, it's exponentially more dangerous. Let's put that into perspective. In 1913, there were roughly 61 sovereign states, but the board was mostly controlled by just a few major European empires. Today, we have 195 sovereign countries, each actively pursuing their own national interests on the world stage. It's simple math, really. The sheer number of actors makes the potential number of black swan events virtually impossible to calculate. And furthermore, the stakes are incomparably higher now. Back in 1913, leaders played by old international rules, anticipating highly localized battlefields. Today, we're dealing with nuclear weapons sitting on hairpin triggers. Our entire civilization could end in minutes before any leader even really understands what's happening.
And there's another absolutely crucial factor adding to this danger, the number 80. It's been over 80 years since World War II ended. That's a long time. And this lack of direct, horrific experience tends to encourage a dangerous kind of recklessness. Policy becomes purely theoretical. Now, back in 1913, a very similar dynamic actually existed. The last major European war had been the Franco-Prussian War, way back in 1871, and before that, Waterloo in 1815. Today, the few remaining World War II veterans are literally centenarians. No current policymaker anywhere in the world truly knows firsthand how a conventional war between modern superpowers will actually unfold, and that breeds a terrifying level of hubris.
Section 4. The slow boil of war. The Victor Davis Hanson theory. We often think of world wars as starting with one massive cinematic explosion, just out of nowhere. But as historian Victor Davis Hanson points out, they can actually creep up much, much slower. World War II only really looks like World War II in hindsight. For the folks actually living through it, it just looked like a series of ordinary, disconnected border conflicts. Japan invades Manchuria in 1931. Italy invades Ethiopia in 1935. Germany remilitarizes the Rhineland in 1936, and then annexes Austria in 1938. At the time, these didn't instantly spell World War. They were just isolated crises. And we really must reflect on this, because with every missile fired and warship torpedoed today, we might actually already be in the early stages of a global war without even realizing it.
To really drive this parallel home, let's consider the role of resources. Why did Japan actually strike Pearl Harbor? It was desperation. Desperation over lost access to key commodities, specifically oil. Now fast forward to today. Disruptions in Venezuela and Iran are severely threatening the flow of oil to China. When a massive global power is poised to lose its vital energy sources, the risk of a desperate, explosive reaction, basically a new Pearl Harbor moment, just skyrockets. The underlying mechanics of resource desperation honestly haven't changed in 80 years.
Section 5. Preventing the next Sarajevo.
All right, so we understand the complex web, we see the historical parallels. Now we absolutely must confront the immense uncertainty of modern conflict. What actually keeps geostrategists awake at night are modern black swan triggers. These are the 21st century equivalents of that Sarajevo assassination. It literally only takes one bomb missing its target and accidentally falling on another country's embassy. It takes one airliner being accidentally shot out of the sky. Just one relatively minor miscalculation. Because of that intractable spaghetti chart of alliances we looked at earlier, one of these accidents could trigger an immediate automated escalation that leads straight into a full-blown nuclear exchange.
There is a really profound truth we all need to remember here. Every military operation is the geostrategic version of Russian roulette. It is incredibly easy for leaders today to believe that precision modern military technology has somehow just magically eliminated the uncertainty of war. But war is and will always remain a highly uncertain human endeavor. Luck, fate, and the enemy always have a say in the outcome. Victory and containment, they are simply never guaranteed.
So, what does all this mean for us? We've built an international system that is every bit as precarious as the one that completely collapsed in 1913, but with the capacity for infinitely more destruction. The kindling is there, the interconnected tripwires are firmly set. The question isn't really just whether the system can withstand a shock, but rather, what will be our 21st century Sarajevo? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep learning, keep questioning, and I'll see you next time.